So it's an honor to be here on stage with two of our rock stars from our industry, known, not just for their accomplishments, but their leadership. There isn't two people you'll hear more kind words out there about their leadership and their ability to contribute. We're going to start by having them give a introduction, and then I want you to, as you listen, try to keep in mind just the big picture and let your mind drift a little bit with their thoughts and ideas on some new ways of thinking. One of the things that I learned about Rick is I placed him as a board member for a company that the founder was very good thinking big. He thought he was thinking big, but he wanted to pull in somebody, a seasoned board member. So he brought Rick aboard, and about 2 years, 3 years, he drove a process, the CEO did, where they drove an incredible exit, especially for the founder. And I asked him later, I said, what was the difference that Rick made by coming aboard? And he said, Roger, boy, I thought we knew how to think big, and I thought we were thinking big until Rick came aboard. He taught us how to really think big. He taught us how to think about the market differently. And I think that's what both Rick and Alex can deliver some thoughts to elevate your game and allow you to think even bigger than what you've been thinking. So with that, why don't you guys give an introduction of yourselves, and it'd be great to hear, Alex, what you've been doing for the last 18 months, and Rick's got one of the most unique business models out there. It'd be nice to have you touch on that as well.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you getting up early. My name is Rick Anderson. I'm chairman of Revival Healthcare Capital. We're a private equity firm down in Austin, Texas. We've got about $600 million of capital under management. We're focused solely on medical device and diagnostics. I've been in private equity for the last 16 years, and we've been pioneering how to do innovation differently. And Alex and I will do our best to at least try to get you to think differently about the traditional way that we all work together, where we invest in a company and we chase strategics around meetings like this to get them to spend some time with our companies, and hopefully at some point we run an auction and try to sell the company to them. So we're trying to think differently about the way that we do that, and that comes from having spent a decade at J&J with Alex and the team. They acquired our startup company, a company called Centocor, got J&J into the monoclonal antibody business, which was sort of the wild, wild west back in the early 2000s. And I started my career back in 1988 here in Irvine with Allergan. So I've been around forever. So I've made every mistake that you can make, both as a strategic, as well as an investor, as well as an operator. So we've tried to apply those lessons over the last couple of decades to how we might do things differently in medtech. So hopefully you'll enjoy the session today. We're going to try to challenge the sort of conventional wisdom a little bit, just get you to think a little bit broader about the way innovation is done in our space. So thank you very much.
Alex Gorsky, and let me just start out by saying that it's just a real pleasure to be here with all of you. When my wife and I arrived last night and pulled out and got out of the car, I must have tripped and bumped into about 85 people between there and checking in. And it's pretty darn special when you have that moment and you're able to see people that you've seen for 20, 30 plus years across the industry, and be able to have those kind of informal interactions and just reconnect. I always love being around people who are just committed to this area of innovation in healthcare, trying to help patients, trying to create new business models. And so thank you really for inviting me and us and having us here. It's also a real pleasure to be up here with Rick. Rick and I have known each other for probably 25 years, and kind of growing up together in Johnson & Johnson, and then later seeing him take off and do some remarkable things, and now even in my next life, being able to connect with him and partner in certain ways has certainly been pretty special. But look, what I would say, to just pick up on Rick, I'm sure we'll have lots of things to think about. That I consider myself incredibly fortunate, not only to have had the honor and the privilege of being at Johnson & Johnson for more than 3 decades, and the last 11 or 12 as CEO and chair, and to just be able to participate, witness, and engage in such a wide array of sciences, research, technologies, markets, and to be able to touch patients, and let alone, and start really new and interesting businesses. That being said, as I've stepped out of that world and into my new world, where in addition to occasionally now getting more than 30 minutes with my wife on any given weekend, I'm sitting on 3, I think, pretty remarkable boards: IBM, JP Morgan, and Apple. And so whether it's the financial side of things, the B2B side, and seeing all things in terms of cybersecurity, AI, connectivity, new apps, let alone the B2C side with Apple, and just what other business do you see where you're touching almost a couple of billion people every day fundamentally with your products, and really seeing this new world emerge at the nexus of healthcare and these new technologies, I think just has remarkable promise. And I guess my only regret is that while the last 35 years have been very, very interesting in seeing some of those shifts, I believe the next 10 years will see that times 10. And so while we'll address a lot of the challenges and a lot of the issues, I think the major thesis to take away is there's ever a time to be in healthcare, to be thinking about innovation, to be thinking about this nexus of new technologies and the rigorous clinical, regulatory, let alone commercial environment that we work in. Carpe diem, now's the time, but it is going to require us to think, operate, and be different. And hopefully we can cover some of those topics during our discussion.
Wow. Fabulous. Thanks, guys. So this is probably going to turn into a lot of banter between these two guys, but why don't we, what I'd like to do is kind of start up framing up the problems that we see, the big picture problems with innovation, and then start unpacking some of the ideas have been floating around in your head about interesting, innovative solutions that go beyond. I call it, you use these words one time, and so we have a lot of home builders here, all right, and the strategics and the things that make difference are neighborhoods. So they want neighborhoods, and we've got the home builders, and hopefully some of these ideas will connect all those things together so people see the neighborhood, right? So I'll let you guys take it from here and just maybe frame up the problems that there's better solutions to.
Sure. Look, some of these will be no surprise to all of you, but interesting in my world, a lot of obviously people ask me about what do you think about healthcare, just very strategically, very broadly, and isn't it a challenge that we're taking 20% of U.S. GDP versus what's happening in other parts of the world, and what are we going to do about that? And I'll tend to listen and absorb and try to reflect. And I say, almost one thing I can guarantee you is over the next 10 years, that's going up. It's sheer math. If you look at demographics, people over the age of 65, the explosion that's taking place here. But if you're in Japan right now, almost 30% of the population is over the age of 65. In the U.S., it's going from 17% to probably 25%. What happens when you turn 65? You start consuming about 2 to 3 to 4 times the amount of healthcare that you did earlier. And you combine that with all the new technologies that you're seeing, And I don't know what that number will be. Is it going to be 20%? Is it going to be 23%? Is it going to be 25%? But I think it will be higher. And actually, I think you can make a very compelling argument that that's not a bad thing for a very developed society to be investing in people to actually have an impact on productivity, let alone quality of life long term. And by the way, globally, I think you're going to see those numbers go up in a significant way, particularly in the developing world. I think that number two, we're just seeing an explosion of new technologies. I mean, there is not a field, and I was blessed at J&J to be able to look across biopharm, med tech, consumer tech, but even now, when I'm investing and looking across those different areas, there's not a day where, imagine if we were in this room 10 years ago, how often would we use the word cure versus treat? And today, we're literally on the cusp of seeing that because of our understanding of basic, some of the fundamental biology, chemistry, physics, and structural issues that, are leading to issues of mortality and morbidity, and our ability to now go in and actually fix, repair, turn off, turn on, or certainly adapt. We've never had that kind of possibility. That being said, that doesn't just happen on its own. It requires a significant amount of investment, requires a very significant ecosystem of fundamental research, of translational research, of clinical development, regulatory, oversight done in the right way, commercial infrastructure to actually make that work. And I think therein lies one of the biggest challenges because you're going to see this demand increasing. You're going to see an explosion of new sciences and new technologies where the bar is going to be higher because of the pressure in the system. And when I say the bar around reimbursement, clinical differentiation, but also the bar in terms of the costs required to develop them. And yet at the same time, when you look at the potential, the outcome that we have with that, it's quite significant.
Just to add to Alex, your point, and I think that we're at that intersection between where technology, meets the cost pressures of global health systems around the world, specifically here in the U.S. Just for every entrepreneur I've met this week, it's like, Rick, when is the fundraising market going to get better? When is capital going to start flowing again? And I think part of the challenge that we have as an industry is, to your point, Alex, is like that pressure point. And for those of you who get to sort of talk to hospital CEOs, I'm on the board of the Medical College of South Carolina, and like the CEO is a surgeon. He's an awesome guy. But the pressures that he feels and the things that he's dealing with workforce demands, how is technology going to enable those things? It's a totally different conversation that's going on in the C-suite of institutions. And I want to sell them robots, and I want to sell them AR, VR headsets and other things. And it's going to become more difficult at our customer level, and therefore, strategics can't just keep buying up technologies. And prices are getting higher. We're forcing them, or we the industry want companies to be later, more patients, more figured out reimbursement. So it creates an opportunity, but it's also a challenge of how you can fund extraordinary technology in a different way. And I think it's going to, what's emerging from that are sort of strange bedfellow partners in the way that we sort of think about innovation. And I think we're at this beautiful time, I think, to Alex's point, where there's going to be a tipping point in the way that we do it as compared to the traditional venture capital, Series A, Series B. Hopefully you'll find somebody do Series C. You get a step up, et cetera, as compared to thinking more strategically about the neighborhoods that we're building. Because at least my experience with talking to the strategics, they buy technologies, but they invest in neighborhoods, and they want to build great neighborhoods. And that's more important. And how we go about that, I think, is a real challenge. But it's also a tremendous opportunity, especially when you put it in the context of, like Alex's point about all the tech that's coming outside of healthcare that's going to come into healthcare over the next 10 years.
Yeah, Rick, if I can just pick up on maybe one of those points. As I was preparing for the talk today, I thought, why don't I reach out to a few of my colleagues? So I tried to speak with probably the CEOs of about the top 5 healthcare systems and the heads of BD for a number of the major strategics, and just said, what are some of the messages? And to your point, imagine the pressure if you're a hospital CEO that you have been under over the last 2 or 3 years. You've seen in many cases, demand flatten or decline, increase certainly in variability and volatility because of COVID. You've seen your fundamental cost structures go up about 35%. And while it's tapered off, it's not going back to where it was. You've seen reimbursement change about 1 or 2%. And you do the math on that, it just doesn't work. And so in terms of, they're also having to rethink, how do we change the way we deliver care? How do we continue to improve quality? How do we obviously monitor the cost side? How do we utilize these new tools in ways to help us become more effective, more efficient? But it's a pretty tight box. That being said, to their credit, while all the CEOs would acknowledge that, their very next point was, we've got to find ways to create new partnerships. Because we're not just going to save ourselves out of this. And it's only when we can think about partnering in new creative ways, particularly in areas where some of these new technologies are going to be adopted, about rethinking some of the classic business models, that it's going to be difficult. And we certainly don't underestimate the challenge associated with that. But I think their appetite, their willingness, and frankly, the realization that it's going to be a necessity for them to do that, I think is higher than ever.
So keep going with those thoughts if you could. What I kind of sense, there's a big disconnect between the payer system, the providers, and what we try to do in the medical device industry and Innovate. What's your thoughts around how to bring our industry forward fast to be more connected with the payer system and the providers, so that the energy of this room, the energy of the industry, is out there solving more big problems instead of just trying to get reimbursed?
Yeah, I'll do my best to try to answer that, Roger. And I don't know if I know the answer. I would just say that I think the world that we're living in today, there's transformational technology development going on, and I think there's going to be plenty of money for that over time. Unfortunately, the majority of the innovation that we do in medical device and diagnostics is incremental. It always has been. And we've made a lot of money as an industry by being the 5th pedicle screw, delivered to spine. I just think the market is going to bifurcate into truly transformational, enabling technology that's smart, delivers incredible patient benefit, but also has an economic, storyline to it that payers are already embracing that. And if you look, you can start to look at categories where the money is moving around within reimbursement, because it's a fixed sum of money. To Alex's point, it's going to go up, but I think we're going to see, more transformational technologies, come into the marketplace, and I think we're going to struggle with the incremental things that we historically have really spent the time on to sort of build our business. That's not to say that's a bad business to be in. I just think that if we're going to work on transformational things as an industry, we're going to have transformational business models to support that, because there's just not enough money in the system, I think, to fund both, game-changing, ophthalmic robotic programs that are going to change the way we can treat people around the world, with cataracts, as compared to, a doc being able to do it. There's not enough physicians in the world to care for the patients that Alex talked about demographically. Technology is going to be an enabling solution for that. But that's going to take people have to write really large checks for that. And on the backside, payers will have to come to pay for that. So to me, it's going to require business model innovation. We can talk about some of those things. But I think it's a challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity. We may see it bifurcate between transformational technologies and sort of incremental things.
Well, so keep going with that, about what you try to do with Revival, about on how you bring innovation forward, and you drive the partnership first, right?
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk about it. Alex, any thought? So it's a different way to think about, for transformational technologies, a sort of a transformational relationship with the traditional buyers in our space. So when I sit with Alex's old team or Edward's team or Boston Scientific's team, they all know the neighborhoods that they want to be in the future, and they're tracking those sort of companies, they're tracking those technologies, they're tracking those emerging markets, because they're very good at talking to thought leaders, strategic, relationships with those folks and customers. And the traditional model is where we investors, our CEOs, are pitching to those strategics. We're trying to get our Series B done. Can I talk JJDC, make $10 million in this round? Maybe they'll buy us someday in the future. That's the traditional model. What I've learned over the last few years has been there are alternative ways to do that. And let me just give you some of the benefits of thinking differently. If you're a CEO in this room, you're going to spend 40 to 50% of your time away from your teams raising money. That's just the job of CEO, and it's a big lift. Imagine a world where you and your investors knew that 5 years from now, you know what your exit is, and you never have to raise money during the next 5 years. You're just driving your company to success. For transformational technology development, it takes that sort of focus and that sort of effort to bring that to the market more efficiently, more effectively than the traditional way that we do it today. There's emerging partnerships between strategics and investors where investors put the money in for the next 5 years in a thoughtful way, where with a pre-negotiated exit, and at the end of the day, some people call it build-to-buys, different people call it different ways. I would just say to you that we as an industry have sort of fooled around with that for a long time, of structured deals and option agreements and all that sort of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I think there's an opportunity for the big strategics that are the natural acquirers of our technologies, that when they have picked the neighborhood, that neighborhood to be developed, there are properties that they want to go out and talk to, as compared to like competing for those 5 years from now and us slogging through that 5 years. Would it not be better to partner earlier, using private capital, plus the strategic capabilities, plus the entrepreneurial spirit and the operating tempo of a startup company? If you think about that for a second, that's different than the way that we've done it in the past. It's also a different financing model. To Alex's point, some of these transformational technologies take $300 million, $400 million of investment to get them to a place to where when the big code takes them, they can scale those businesses globally. And we haven't been able to do that as an industry, and I think there's a real opportunity to rethink that.
And look, maybe just to pick up on a few of Rick's comments, I was talking earlier about the challenge that you have if certainly you're on the provider side right now. But having sat in that chair running one of the large strategics, let's talk about the challenges that they face. So it's a pretty hot seat. And don't get me wrong, it's a very special place to be able to sit. But it's not quite what you think, and it's not for the faint of heart, as I would say. But if you look at them, there's such a premium on growth right now. And so as they're looking at their portfolio, as they're looking at their 5-year plan and their projections, they're balancing a P&L where they've got massive commitments internally and externally already made. They've got a balance sheet that they're trying to navigate at the same time in a world where, frankly, large M&A is quite challenged. And in certain cases, even small M&A, and that's a whole other discussion we can have, that I'm quite concerned about. And so you start thinking about the levers that they have to pull to speed up innovation in terms of what are they investing in their own research and development, how can they go externally, What kind of guardrails are now going to be placed on that? What are the expectations that the street has that they're trying to navigate at the same time, let alone what's happening in the competitive environment and with their customers? That's why, to Rick's point, I think more and more they're also trying to understand, how do I do this differently? And not just think, do I up my internal R&D by X%, or do I simply put my balance sheet to work in a fairly traditional manner? But are there other ways that we can collaborate, that we can partner to help me achieve that goal, knowing in particular that some of these new technologies are no longer just a $25 million, $30 million program, but it's a $300-400 million commitment over the next 5 years. And remember, there's clearly the technology side of it. There's the financial side, but it's also personal. You've got people inside that have committed their lives, their careers, to building out certain platforms. And sometimes it does become binary. It's either we're going to fund this or going to fund that. And so coming up with different kind of partnerships to say, hey, how can we just not make this, a choice of this or that, but how can we do this and that in a way that, addresses the concerns that I just mentioned to you, but also gives you the possibility, of an appropriate outcome in that same timeline. I think that, the environment is ripe for that. And frankly, every BD head that I've talked to would say those are the kind of things that would like to talk more about. Now, one other thing that I might add there, because let's pick up on the house building, the neighborhood analogy, or the metaphor, because I think it's interesting, is not only do they want to have a good foundation, not only do they want to be in good neighborhoods, but they want good neighbors. Because all that other stuff can be right, but if that bad neighbor moves in next door, it's really tough. It sucks. And that's the other piece of feedback that I got, is that the quality of the partner is so important, and frankly can sometimes supersede just the dollar signs. It's, what do you bring to the party? Are you going to add value in other ways that are ultimately going to help accelerate our team? Does my team, who's now going to be partnering with your team perhaps in a different way, do they trust you? Or is it a constant back and forth negotiation on each and every decision? Or are we actually collaborating, both have skin in the game, with clear milestones that we're working together, again, in a very collaborative way, trying to achieve? Those are the kind of partnerships more than ever, we're in, and frankly, where we both win, or perhaps we don't. But we will have learned a lot through that in partnership. And so I think that's another really important element, that if I was sitting with all of you thinking, okay, what is the management of those companies trying to deal with? And then how, what are some, again, new creative, innovative ways of trying to address those?
Can I just pick up on that, Alex? I mean, I think there's a capability question that Alex is pulling that thread. The human beings that are going to work in, if you think about entrepreneurs that are in this room that run companies, you got to be a little bit nuts to survive. You just got to be a little bit crazy to do that. Your operating tempo's higher. You figure out how to work without a net. You don't have the capital that you need to get things done. You can't hire the level of talent that you really need to sort of get there. That's a fact. In these sort of advanced partnerships that Alex is talking about, the capabilities will come because the money will be there. The mindset, though, is one of a master collaborator that still has all the benefit of the entrepreneur. So the CEO of a small company that wants to be as part of a build-to-buy sort of relationship with a J&J or a Medtronic or whoever, their tasks are different. They still got to drive their agenda, but they're doing that because they know we're building a company, building a technology, building a healthy market that we're going to put into their bag 5 years from now. That takes an entire different thought model and how you show up to be able to do that. And it also takes patient capital to do that as well. And the people that are around your table at your board level have a mix of operating experience and financial experience and sort of help you and enable that to happen. I'll give you an example. When I was at J&J, I bought a series of companies when I was a company group chairman, and each one of those companies normally cost me $10 million a year for 3 years, so $30 million just to get the technology that I bought in my quality system, in my design history files. It was always a redo, always. That's real money coming out of my P&L. If we can do all of that work in a startup mode, we're never going to build J&J's quality system, but if you can build it on the 2x4s of J&J's quality system and reduce that $30 million when they acquire it, it just takes the friction out of the system. Now, that's different than the way we do it today. As a small co, we're running as fast as we can, as lean as we can, and we got to be able to get our product approved or get it in the market or complete a clinical trial or get reimbursement. So we're doing whatever the trade-offs we have to make. In the build-to-buy model, it takes capabilities in the management team, mindset. It takes capabilities at the board level that have operating chops to be helpful, to be able to do that. And it takes, the ability to sort of write fairly large checks. To Alex's point, some of these programs are $300 or $400 million, and that's probably going to be reserved for the more transformational technologies in the marketplace. So if you're a CEO working on transformational technology in a brand new category, which could be a huge market potential for strategic, there's plenty of interest, at least my experience has been, plenty of interest to have conversations with you about both funding your company as well as how you manage your company into the future.
I'd like to pick up on one of Rick's comments there, and that is, it's a bit of a challenge in the spirit of being a bit provocative, and also encouraging all of you to think, when we're talking partnerships, okay, what is it on the customer side and the payer side? What is it on the strategic side? How do we do it? I'd also challenge you on the technology side. And what I mean by that is some of these new technologies, whether it's cloud, whether it's connectivity, whether it's obviously AI on the ML side, whether it's sensing, whether it's how do we incorporate new imaging, I would submit are going to be fundamental to breakthroughs in biopharm and medtech in a very important way over the next 10 years. And if all of us in the room, you and your companies, aren't thinking about how do I build those skills, how do I build those capabilities beyond what has traditionally been just the medtech or the biopharm world, you may have a nice little runway of about 3 years, but I guarantee in 10 years, it's going to change dramatically. And I think there is huge opportunity, yet there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get these different parties in the room. So for example, about a little over a year ago, I had a chance, it was over a great bottle of red, and I was with somebody from the technology side, and one of the things we were talking about how if you look at the traditional Silicon Valley technology, then you think healthcare, med tech or biopharm technology, that we speak different languages. And that on one side, there tended to be this, we can solve it. We can either do the technology, we can do the app, and we're going to come in, we can do it, pretty, quickly, and that's looking far past a lot of the clinical, regulatory, quality, and the other issues. And on the other side of the table, I dare say, there's those that could be said are a bit dogmatic or iconoclastic, where we say, well, you just don't understand our world. Unless you do this, unless you do that. And we actually had a dinner where we brought together a lot of the names that you read about. I'm not going to point anybody out, but trust me, there were some of the best minds in AI. We had people from research and development from probably the top 4 or 5 med tech, as well as pharma companies. We had people formerly of the FDA inside the agency, and just trying to have this conversation. And I think that conversation is going to be taking place a lot more going forward. And to me, it's not a matter of if those two worlds are going to come together, but it's going to be how they do that. And I think developing the right kind of capabilities, the right kind of tools, the right kind of partnerships with those companies so that we can harmonize and again, collaborate in the right way will have a significant impact, frankly, on the kind of, future that we can envision for patients, healthcare systems, in bringing these things together in pretty exciting ways.
Okay. So maybe keep going a bit with that. These are two of our brightest minds, big thinkers. What do you think when you think out 10 years? What's it look like? What are the major differences in the medical device industry, or maybe just major differences in our healthcare system? Granted that we're going to spend greater percentage of our GDP is decided on healthcare, which I think your great point is, it's okay. It's okay if we spend more money on healthcare. But elaborate a bit on that. How do you see that 10 years out?
Yeah, you want to go, Rick? Okay. Look, so a few things. I mentioned earlier, I do think it will go up, but I think there will be extraordinary pressure on the system. I mean, none of us in here, well, there's probably a few of us that remember high interest rate environments. I remember when my wife and I bought our first home, we started at 12.7 with a lock at about 18.5. And so when I hear people complaining about interest rates today, I go, pull your pants up, get ready. But clearly, for the last 10 years or so, access to capital hasn't been an issue. Globalization has been a key theme. We haven't lived, at a more macro level, frankly, in a geopolitical environment. I think we're going to see that, which will infect our industry, by the way. Because if you think about where we source a lot of things, and that's a whole other stream that we could talk about. And look, I'm somebody that believes the US and China must find a way to live, to work together in the long run. But I think the nature of that relationship has changed. And it won't be just the same way that it was over the past 10 years. And I even think in a post-COVID world, there will be more of a regional alliance. And there, I do think business can play a very important role of being glue for that. But that's a whole topic. But I think there will be a lot of pressure. It's certainly my hope that we keep a market-based system moving forward, because I think that's the best source of innovation. But don't underestimate the threats that exist out there for this kind of system. And if we, as an industry, don't focus on, one, not only getting great technology that can extend lives, that can improve the quality of life, and can go out, but also in ensuring people can get access in a broad way here in the United States, there will be countervailing political forces that could fundamentally change the way that our ecosystem works. Do not underestimate that threat. So I think it's really incumbent, upon us to do that. And then third, I think we have to realize that we are going to have to employ these tools to make our systems more efficient and more effective. To Rick's earlier point, the days of coming out and saying, well, my device or my product is 4% difference, but I'm going to charge 25% more for it, it's not going to work. And I think, if I look 10 years from now, the companies that are going to do really well are those that innovate. And again, I think we've got tremendous potential, but it's got to move from the incremental. And that's always a tough discussion, even inside a company, because in healthcare, when you swing for the fences, we know that there's an inherent risk in that. And what happens in this industry so often is you go from A to B, from B to C, from C to D. Then the next thing you know, over 10 years, you've gone from A to G. And if you've tried to go on from A to G right out of the blocks, it's extraordinarily difficult. And so I think getting that piece of it right is also going to be critically important. And look, I think the other aspect that will have to change is how do our commercial models keep up with the technology and the science and the innovation models? Because if we now, let's just say in biopharm, create more bespoke approaches, more personalized approaches, the current reimbursement system won't work if we're only going to go after and treat, a few thousand patients versus hundreds of thousands of patients. And I would, dare say, if as we try to democratize med tech and the accessibility, we're going to have to, again, think differently about those models. And I don't underestimate the challenges associated, because everybody's got an ox they're going to feel is going to be gored in between. But we're going to need as much innovation, out of the box thinking, and different approaches there as well.
Well, thanks, Alex. So we are out of time. But Rick, why don't you just close it out with some visionary thoughts about what you see? What do you see ahead?
I can't really guarantee any visionary thoughts, but let me just, I want to punch up what Alex just said. So stand out 10 years from now and look back to where we are today. So I'll give you the world according to Rick. We'll have different sites of care where patients will be treated, and that will all be enabled by technology, and it probably will not come from the med tech industry. In other words, how do we treat people, whether it be smart, whether it be for workforce development, those kind of things. And you're preventing, like, we move from healthcare to keeping, people, or wellness to keep them out of the system. And how do we do that? The box called a hospital is going to be more challenged than ever. So different alternative sites of care. I think secondarily, enabling tech will become the focus of med tech 10 years from now, as compared to hardware, implants, all that stuff. So if you're working on a dumb, quote unquote, dumb device that's not communicating, that you plan to bring to market 10 years from now, you're probably going to have a difficult slog. So I would just say that, like, the future, I think, and I'm excited about it, because we've got this convergence like we've never seen before on the technology side, that has nothing to do with healthcare, with a different operating model, different tempo, et cetera, coupled with extraordinary, powerhouse, big healthcare companies that are dying to get into new neighborhoods, but they're also very aware of how their customer health systems, pressures they're under, how that's changing. We should be enablers of that. We should not try to fight it. We should lean into it. Let's bring the technology to marketplace. But it's going to require entrepreneurs, investors, strategics to think differently about the way that we enable the next generation of healthcare.
All right. Thank you guys so very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.